They cut down my trees while I was at work, every single one of them. And when I asked why, my neighbor smiled and said, "You've got a better view now, too." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a decision. And if he thought I was just going to let it go, he didn't know me at all. I live on a quiet hillside road just outside a small lake town in Northern California. The kind of place where people wave even if they don't know you, where the mornings come in slow with fog rolling off the water, and everything feels a little softer, a little quieter than the rest of the world, or at least it used to. When I bought my house almost a decade ago, it wasn't fancy, not even close, but it had something you can't really put a price on: privacy, and a row of old red maple trees that ran along the side of the property like a natural wall. They weren't perfectly straight, some leaned a bit. A couple had scars from storms years back, but together they formed this thick canopy that filtered the sunlight into these warm, shifting patterns across the yard. That's where I built my little sitting area. Nothing special, just a couple of weathered chairs, a small table, and gravel underfoot so it didn't turn to mud in winter, but it was mine. On weekends I'd sit out there with coffee, sometimes a beer later in the day, listening to the wind move through the leaves. It had this sound, almost like distant ocean waves, steady and calming, like the world had slowed down just enough for you to breathe. And the best part was, you couldn't really see the neighbor's place from there. Back then the house next door belonged to an older couple, the Whitakers, who kept to themselves. We'd exchange a wave, maybe a quick chat by the mailbox, but mostly we lived parallel lives, peaceful, predictable. Then about 3 years ago, they sold the place. At first, I didn't think much of it. Houses change hands. That's normal. But then the moving trucks came, and with them, Ethan and Claire Dalton. Younger than me by maybe 10 years, full of energy, the kind of people who don't just move into a house, they transform it. Within weeks, the place turned into a construction zone. Contractors in and out, trucks parked along the road. The constant hum of saws and drills. They replaced the windows, tore out the old deck, and built this massive elevated balcony facing the lake. All glass railing and polished wood, it looked like something out of a real estate magazine. I remember standing in my yard one evening, watching them measure angles and sight lines from that balcony, pointing toward the water, talking about maximizing the view. That phrase stuck with me, maximizing the view. At the time, I shrugged it off, figured it was their house, their project, and besides, my trees had been there longer than either of us, tall and thick and well within my property line. They weren't going anywhere. Or at least, that's what I thought. The day it happened was a Tuesday, nothing special about it. I left for work early, same as always, grabbed coffee from the gas station down the road, got stuck behind a delivery truck for half the commute, just a normal day. When I got back that afternoon, I knew something was wrong before I even got out of the truck. It was the light. It felt wrong. Too bright, too direct, like someone had peeled away a layer of the world I was used to. I stepped out, shut the door slowly, and just stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw it. Or more accurately, I didn't. The trees were gone. All of them. Where there had been thick trunks and branches that morning, there were now jagged stumps sitting in the dirt like broken teeth. The ground was covered in pale wood chips, scattered across the grass and into my sitting area, which now sat fully exposed under the harsh afternoon sun. No shade, no privacy, no barrier between my yard and theirs. Just open space and silence. I remember walking over slowly, like if I didn't move too fast, maybe it would somehow reverse itself, like I'd blink and the trees would still be there, but they weren't. I crouched down next to one of the stumps, ran my hand across the rough surface. It was still warm from the saw, fresh, raw, like a wound. That's when the anger hit. Not all at once, not explosive, more like something heavy settling into my chest, steady and certain. I didn't even go inside. I just turned and walked straight over to the Daltons' front door. Ethan answered after a couple seconds, like he'd been expecting someone, and the first thing I noticed was that he didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked satisfied. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. I didn't return the greeting. What happened to my trees? I kept my voice even, but there was no mistaking the edge in it. He glanced past me toward the yard, then back at me, like we were both looking at the same thing from different angles. "Oh, those?" he said, almost too casually. "Yeah, I had a crew come out this morning. They were blocking the lake view from the balcony." I stared at him for a second, waiting for the part where he realized what he'd just said, but it didn't come. They were on my property, I said. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. They were right on the line, he replied. Figured it was kind of a shared situation. It wasn't, I said, sharper now. They were mine. Every single one of them. There was a pause then, just long enough for him to decide how he wanted to play this. Well, he said, exhaling like this was all a bit inconvenient. They were pretty old anyway. And honestly, this way both our places get more sunlight. It's not exactly a bad thing. That was the moment something shifted. Not just anger, something colder. Because it wasn't just what he did, it was how little it mattered to him. I didn't argue right there. Didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten anything. I just looked at him for a second longer, then nodded once and turned away. But inside, I was already thinking. And that was the beginning of it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was pacing or angry in that loud, obvious way, but because my brain just wouldn't shut off. It kept replaying the same image over and over. Those stumps in the ground. The way the light hit the yard now. Too harsh, too exposed, like someone had taken a private space and turned it into a stage. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got up, walked into the kitchen, and pulled out the folder where I kept all the paperwork from when I bought the house. Closing documents, inspection reports, and most importantly, the property survey. I spread it out on the table, flattened the corners with my hands, and traced the boundary line with my finger. Slow, deliberate, and there it was, clear as day. Every single tree had been well inside my property. Not close, not questionable mine. I leaned back in the chair and just sat there for a minute, staring at it, because now it wasn't just a bad situation, it was a choice he had made, knowingly or not. It didn't really matter anymore. The next morning, I went back over. Same door, same knock, same man answering it. Except this time I came prepared. I checked the survey, I said, holding the paper up just enough for him to see. Those trees were completely on my land. He glanced at it, barely, like it was a menu he wasn't interested in reading. Look, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, already sounding tired of the conversation. If this turns into some kind of legal thing, it's gonna take forever. Lawyers, paperwork, all that, nobody wins. You already took something that wasn't yours, I replied. I'm just asking you to make it right. And I'm saying it's not that simple. He shot back, a little sharper now. Trees don't last forever. They were gonna come down eventually. That wasn't your call to make. We stood there for a second, the tension just sitting between us, and then he did something that, in hindsight, told me exactly who I was dealing with. He smiled, not friendly, not apologetic, just this thin, dismissive smile. You've got more sunlight now, he said. Try to look at the upside. And with that, he stepped back and closed the door. Just like that. I stood there on his porch for a moment, listening to the click of the latch, and something inside me settled into place. Because now I understood, this wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't a neighborly disagreement. It was someone who believed they could take what they wanted, shrug it off, and move on. And for the next few days, I watched. Not in some obsessive way, just quietly, from my side of the yard. Every evening, right around sunset, Ethan would step out onto that new balcony, lean against the railing, and just stand there looking out over the lake, like he'd carved out the perfect view for himself and was enjoying every second of it. Where my trees used to be, there was now a clean, open gap. A direct line from his balcony to the water. Unobstructed. Exactly what he wanted. And I'll admit, for a couple days, I went back and forth in my head about what to do. Call a lawyer, file a claim, go through the whole process. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like dragging the situation out into something bigger, slower, colder. He expected that. He expected delays, paperwork, maybe even that I'd give up halfway through. And that's when a different idea started to form. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady thought that kept coming back. If he wanted more sunlight, I could give him that. The following Saturday, I got up early, drove into town, and picked up a load of lumber, pressure-treated posts, long beams, hardware. Nothing fancy, just solid materials. When I got back, Ethan was already outside, up on his balcony with a coffee in hand. I could feel him watching as I started unloading everything into the side yard. I didn't wave, didn't say anything, just got to work. The first step was the posts. I measured carefully, marked out a straight line running parallel to the property boundary, right where the trees had once stood. Then I started digging. Post holes, one after another, deep enough to anchor something permanent. It was slow work, physical, the kind that keeps your mind focused, your thoughts steady. By mid-afternoon, the first set of vertical posts were in place, standing tall and evenly spaced. From the balcony, I heard his voice for the first time that day. "What are you building?" I looked up, wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm, and shrugged. "Just putting something together," I said. He leaned over the railing a bit, squinting down at the layout. "Looks pretty big," he added. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." That was it. No argument, no confrontation, just a conversation that didn't really go anywhere. But I could tell he was curious, maybe a little uneasy. The next day, I started connecting the beams. Long horizontal pieces running across the tops of the posts, forming a frame, something that, at first glance, looked like the start of a pergola. And that's exactly what it was, at least on paper. By Sunday afternoon, the structure was fully framed out. Tall, clean lines, running the entire length of that side of the yard, right along the same space where the trees had once stood. From a distance, it almost looked open, harmless. But I wasn't finished. Monday after work, I picked up heavy-duty shade cloth. Dark, thick, designed to block out a significant amount of sunlight, the kind used in greenhouses and outdoor structures where you want full control over light and heat. That evening, I started attaching it across the top, panel by panel, pulling it tight, securing it to the beams. The effect was immediate. The harsh sunlight that had flooded my yard since the trees were cut softened, then dimmed. By the time I finished the top, the space underneath felt like it used to cool, shaded, calm. But I kept going. The next day, I added panels along the side, facing his property. Not completely solid, but close enough. Dense enough to block the direct line of sight. By the end of the week, what had started as a simple pergola had become something else entirely, a long, continuous shaded wall running along the boundary. From my side, it restored everything I had lost: privacy, shade, that quiet sense of separation. But from his side, it changed the view. Completely. The first time I saw his reaction, it was almost cinematic. He stepped out onto the balcony like he always did, coffee in hand, expecting the same open stretch of lake. And instead, he stopped. Just stopped. Because where there had been open space, there was now a solid expanse of dark fabric and wooden frame. No lake. No sunlight cutting through. Just shade. I was in my yard at the time, adjusting one of the lower panels, when I heard him call out, "Hey." I looked up slowly. "What is that?" he asked, gesturing toward the structure, his voice already carrying that edge of irritation. I stepped back, glanced up at it like I was seeing it for the first time. "Shade," I said, replacing what was there before. His jaw tightened a bit. "You're blocking the entire view." I tilted my head slightly, considering that. "Yeah," I replied. "I guess I am." There was a pause, heavier this time. "You can't just build something like that," he said. "There are rules." I nodded. "There are." And I followed them. He stared at me for a second, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if this was something he could push back on the same way he had before. "I'm calling the city," he said finally. I shrugged. "You should," I replied. And that was the part he didn't expect. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was just done. 2 days later, a city inspector pulled up in a white truck with the county seal on the door. Not in a rush, not dramatic. Just another stop on what was probably a long list of minor disputes and code checks. I was in the yard when he arrived, adjusting one of the lower ties on the shade cloth, and he gave me a small nod like we were about to talk about something routine. Which, in a way, we were. "You the homeowner?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans as I walked over. He introduced himself, explained that there'd been a complaint about a structure near the property line. Nothing unusual in his tone, no assumptions. Just process. Ethan came out a minute later, moving a little quicker than usual, like he'd been waiting for this moment, like this was where things finally turned in his favor. "That thing," he said, pointing toward the pergola wall. "It's way too close to the line, and it's blocking light, blocking view. I'm pretty sure it violates height restrictions too." The inspector didn't react much, just pulled out a tablet and asked a couple basic questions. When was it built? What materials? Approximate height. Then he asked if I had a survey. "I do," I said, already heading inside to grab it. When I came back, he walked the length of the structure slowly, measuring distances, checking alignment. occasionally glancing at the survey and then back at the posts, calm, methodical. Ethan hovered nearby, arms crossed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like he was waiting for the exact sentence that would undo everything. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. After about 15 minutes, the inspector straightened up, tapped a few things into his tablet, and then looked at both of us. Well, he said, the structure is within the allowable height, setbacks are compliant, and it's fully contained within your property line. He nodded toward me. So as far as city code goes, there's no issue here. There it was. Simple, clean, final. Ethan blinked, like he needed a second to process that the outcome he'd been expecting just wasn't happening. That can't be right, he said, a little too quickly. It completely blocks my balcony view. The inspector gave a small shrug, not dismissive, just factual. View obstruction isn't regulated between private properties, he replied. If it's on his land and within code, he's allowed to build it. There wasn't really anything else to say after that. The inspector wrapped up, gave us both a polite nod, and headed back to his truck. No drama, no lecture, just another resolved case. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, staring at the structure like it had personally offended him, and then, without another word, he turned and went back inside. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, the conflict was. But the aftermath, that lingered in quieter ways. The first few evenings after that, I noticed he stopped going out onto the balcony as much. When he did, it wasn't for long, a minute or two at most, like the space had lost whatever it was he'd built it for in the first place. The open view he'd worked so hard to create was gone, replaced by something deliberate, something chosen. On my side, though, things started to settle back into a rhythm. The shade returned, not exactly the same as before, but close enough. The harsh light that had taken over the yard softened again, filtered through the dark fabric above. It wasn't leaves moving in the wind, not that same gentle sound I used to fall asleep to with the windows open, but it was quiet in its own way. Controlled. Intentional. A few weeks later, I started adding climbing plants along the base of the structure. Nothing fancy, just a mix of vines that would take hold over time. At first, it was just small patches of green creeping up the posts, but by the end of the season, they'd begun to spread, weaving through the beams, softening the edges of the whole thing. From my yard, it started to feel less like a wall, and more like something that had always been there. Natural in its own constructed way. People on the street noticed it too. One afternoon, my neighbor from across the road, an older guy named Frank, stopped by while I was out front. He leaned on the fence, looked past me toward the pergola, and let out a low whistle. That's one way to solve a problem, he said. I smiled a little. Figured it was more efficient than arguing. He chuckled, shaking his head. Efficient, yeah? That's one word for it. Word gets around in places like this, not in a malicious way, just in that quiet, observant way small communities have. People see things, connect dots, form their own opinions. Some thought I'd gone too far. Others thought I hadn't gone far enough. And honestly, I could see both sides. Because here's the thing. If you strip it down to the basics, it wasn't really about the trees anymore. Not entirely. It was about boundaries. About what happens when someone decides their comfort matters more than yours, when they take something, justify it, and expect you to just adjust around it like it's no big deal. I could have gone the legal route, dragged it out, maybe gotten compensation months down the line, a check that wouldn't have brought those trees back anyway. Or I could respond in a way that was immediate, proportional, and undeniable. Something that said, clearly and without argument, you don't get to make decisions on my property and walk away unaffected. That's what the pergola became. Not revenge, not exactly, more like a correction. A line, drawn in wood and fabric instead of ink. Now, every once in a while, I still see Ethan out there. Not as often, and not for as long, but enough to know he hasn't completely given up on the space. The difference is, he doesn't look relaxed anymore. He looks aware of the boundary, of the consequence. And me? I still sit out there in the evenings, in the shade, same spot as before, different structure overhead, but the same sense of quiet settling in as the sun goes down behind the ridge. Sometimes I think about those trees, the way they used to move with the wind, the way the light filtered through them just right. And yeah, there's a part of me that misses that. You don't replace something like that overnight. But then I look at what stands there now, something I built with my own hands, something that exists because I chose not to just accept what happened, and there's a different kind of satisfaction in that. Not loud, not obvious, just steady. So now I'm curious. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have taken the legal route, waited it out, let the system handle it? Or would you have done exactly what I did, built something that made your point immediately, even if it stirred things up a little? And on the other side of that, do you think what he did was just careless or something more intentional? I'd honestly like to hear where you land on it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, the kind that sits somewhere between everyday life and something a little more complicated, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and stick around. There's always another story.